Ma'am, will you please state and spell your full name for the record?
Annie Cushing, Cushing.
Can you please explain for the record, are you related to one of the victims in this case?
I am. I'm Tylee Ryan's aunt, Joseph Ryan's sister.
And as you came here today, did you come with a statement that you'd like to share with the jury?
I did.
Do you have that with you?
I do.
Would you like to go ahead and read that now, please?
Sure. Thank you. I remember getting a call from my brother Joe in 2002 to tell me he had gotten married, converted to the LDS faith, and was expecting a baby. Joe had been the perennial bachelor of the family, in his 40s, never married, and no kids. So this was very surprising news. He wanted to fly me out to meet his new wife. They were both so excited to be having a little girl. They had already picked out her name and were well ahead of schedule, buying the best of everything this little baby would possibly need. A couple years later, we vacationed together as families. Joe was the quintessential first-time father. Every developmental milestone Tylee achieved convinced him all the more she was clearly a child prodigy. He was also convinced she looked just like him and would find excuses to refer to her as Daddy's little girl. Truth be told, Tylee actually looked more like her mom's side of the family, which I never told Joe. But on the inside, she was so her dad. She was always dressed like a princess and had an arsenal of hairstyles that she chose from each day. But once she learned to talk, she would let you know what she wanted and was prepared to negotiate those desires like she was finalizing a legally binding contract. Even as a little girl, Tylee knew what she wanted, and we were all her humble servants. Fast forward to 2018. I flew out to Phoenix. Sorry. I flew out to Phoenix after my brother's death and was able to reconnect with Tylee. She was intelligent, clever, funny, sarcastic, and had the voice of an angel. She would just walk around the house singing. She would eventually take her love for singing to the karaoke platform Smule, leaving behind breadcrumbs for those of us who loved her and the thousands who would come to love her. But I could also tell she was depressed, and I desperately wanted to reach her to let her know I wanted to be in her life as much as she would allow. We just happened to connect on pop culture. We'd referenced ridiculous memes and viral videos, and her mom had no idea what we were talking about. So Tylee and I would take turns explaining the references. It was the first spark of connection, our common ground. Our second was over questions she had about what I did for a living. Oddly enough, her dad and I were both analysts, so I think it felt safer for her to ask about my world than her dad's, since any mention of her dad was a trigger for her mom, and she hadn't seen her dad in a while. I even told her that if nothing else, she definitely had the personality of an analyst. Facts were very important to her. Case in point, her mom, who was braggadocious and never let facts get in the way of a good story, was telling me about one of Tylee's academic achievements, and Tylee corrected her on a relatively inconsequential detail her mom had overstated. I teased her afterwards and was like, dude, who does that? You couldn't have just let that detail slide. And we had a good laugh. But to Tylee, I think if it wasn't accurate, it just wasn't meaningful. She was exacting, just like her dad. My last night in Phoenix, we were supposed to have a girls' night out, but her mom changed her mind and said she was going to bed. It turned out to be the best gift she could have given me because it was the first time on that trip Tylee and I actually had time alone to connect. We enjoyed some small talk and foraged for food. But then I took a calculated risk and decided to share some things that I thought were really special about her. First, let me say, I've watched a lot of true crime over the years and know the tendency of family members to apply a halo effect to their loved ones after they pass, especially if they were victims. But after I left, one of my adult kids reached out to me to see how I was doing. We had an extended text message exchange about my time in Phoenix. And I talked about that interaction, which memorialized it. I just happened to find it in the course of the case. And I was like, no one's going to believe this actually happened. Everyone's going to attribute this to the Dateline effect. So I've actually published it publicly. For context, I had shared details about some of the conflict in the home leading up to this snippet. I wrote, Tylee opened up to me the last night after Lola went to bed. I feel trapped. I connected with Tylee, but don't want anything to do with Lolo ever again. And for this next snippet, I had shared some details about an outburst Tylee had toward her mom after she had said something grossly inappropriate about her dad. I wrote, she was this angry, resentful, sarcastic teen the entire week. Then we talked alone, and she was putty. She was so sweet and genuinely responsive to the genuine positive feedback I gave her. There's a picture of Tylee floating out there where she has the same sweet smile I saw that night. It had a vulnerability to it. It's my favorite picture of her because here she was, this walled garden, and in that interaction, she let me in. Even if it was just a step past the threshold, that brief exchange was the highlight of that week for me. Since learning more about her story, even up to that point, I completely understand why Tylee wasn't quick to let anyone in. Excuse me. By sharp contrast, according to Alex Gilbert, the defendant's neighbor who testified, he said Tylee didn't like people. That's not true. She wasn't ever angry or disrespectful in any way toward me. And I was there less than a week. We got along swimmingly. Now, his reported follow-up statement about her not liking him, that tracks. She was not one to suffer fools. I also found out in that chat she loved New York City. That was my open door. So I lobbed the idea of flying her out for her 18th birthday over the fence, and it was a hit. As I said in that text exchange, I was done with her mom and her extremist beliefs, but I thought there was a chance I'd have the opportunity to develop a relationship with Tylee that wasn't dependent on her mom. I plan to show her the best views that tourists don't know about, walk the High Line together, get real pizza, take her to the rotating restaurant in Times Square with breathtaking 360 views of the city, and let her reconnect with my daughter, who she hadn't seen since she was little. Her 18th birthday couldn't have been further from this celebratory event I had imagined. As her remains had been recently discovered in the defendant's backyard. Getting back to our last time together, I want to be fair. That trip certainly wasn't all bad. There were also some very sweet moments between Tylee and her mom, moments of hilarity and a fun outing. I also didn't see anything concerning with JJ. Everyone was nurturing and protective of him. JJ, like his big sister, didn't let just anyone in. I had no idea if I'd be able to connect with him. I was fascinated by this little boy who had a wild imagination and the closest bond I've ever seen a child have with a dog. Bailey was his constant companion. But with JJ, as more of an outsider, Your interactions felt more like moving alongside him rather than engaging directly. So I was looking for, excuse me, any possibility of our worlds to kind of cross. To that end, one thing I noticed was JJ didn't just watch TV. It was like an immersive experience. He'd be talking to the characters, commenting, imitating sounds, especially explosions. He loved imitating explosions. So I tried to do the same thing, but kind of tamped down and on the DL. I would just look at the TV and comment at something outrageous, like, what? That's wild. So we were both just kind of yelling at the TV. Whether it was a connection or not, it at least made watching TV a lot more fun. But then this one time shortly after that, his mom and I were talking in the kitchen next to the island. It's germane to the story. As a function of JJ's autism and unbounding energy, he'd run in this one circuit, which included the area just on the other side of the island. And their house at that time was palatial, so it was a pretty significant circuit. But on one trip, he broke out of his circuit and without slowing down, ran into the kitchen and into me, throwing off my balance a bit because I wasn't expecting it. Without a word, he hugged me and kept on running. I stood there stunned and asked his mom, was that a drive-by hugging? I was so touched because it was the first discernible indicator that we connected. That night, as she was putting him down for bed, I heard him ask her, will Annie be here when I wake up? Again, we never interacted directly in any way, but he recognized presence. So like Tylee, I didn't know if our worlds would ever collide in any meaningful way, but I believe that love is a universal language that's somehow communicated between sincere hearts. Just a month after that visit, Tylee wrote in an Instagram post on her mom's birthday that she had, quote, won the lottery with this one as my mom. So I believe there was hope for them to one day be able to set up some healthier boundaries and find peace. But just 4 months after that post, to the day, that would all change. That was the day her mom met the defendant. It was the spark that eventually would set so many of our lives ablaze. This case has been death by 1,000 cuts. Each detail that would come out over the past 4 years was just another cut. Sorry. It's taken a toll on my family, my health, and my overall perspective. And it felt like the world had become a more dangerous place. Just a little peek behind the curtain. There was one time early in the case, Tylee and JJ were still missing, and the city was in lockdown because of the pandemic, and police were out en masse because of protests and riots in the city. It was like the whole world had gone mad. But I had gone for a run through Times Square, which looked like a ghost town with a sea of mental health billboards. When I passed a corner newsstand, there was a picture of Tylee and JJ on a magazine cover with a heart-grabbing headline. Seeing that against a backdrop of what looked like a post-apocalyptic landscape made it all the more surreal. But to be clear, it's still surreal. It always will be. If someone had told me in 2002 that in 20 years' time, Joe and Tylee would both be dead and I'd be swept up in a criminal case around Tylee's murder, I wouldn't have believed it. Tylee had her whole life ahead of her. She had dignity, she had dreams, she had goals. This defendant stole all of that. To close on a high note, a Greek philosopher once said, the wheels of justice turn slowly, but grind exceedingly fine. I believe that has happened in this case. Thank you.